This hour of programming is brought to you by Krista Knowles and Tom Fettig. You can become a sustaining member of WOMR for as little as $15 a month. Welcome to Healing Wisdom, a Thursday morning talk show featuring guests sharing their stories and knowledge. We discuss the healing aspects of the arts, metaphysics, social justice, and adventure through all types of terrain. So join me, Pandora Peoples, here on WOMR 92.1 FM in Provincetown and WFMR 91.3 FM in Orleans. We're streaming worldwide at WOMR.org. Historical Commission member and former Bourne Fire Chief Stephen Philbrick is with us today. He's also the chairman of the 100th anniversary of the Bourne Fire Department. Welcome, Steve. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, glad to see you, Pandora. Good to be see you again.
Yeah, absolutely. First off, you donated an item to the Truro Historical Society. It's an object that's been passed down through generations. And on August 21st, folks can see it on display. There'll also be a talk from writer, researcher, and founder of Atlantic Blackbox, Meadow, Dibble. So tell us about this object and what you knew about it.
Okay, well, back when I was quite young, I used to visit my grandparents up in Braintree, and they had a lot of old documents, but one that was framed long ago, very old frame up on the wall. And it was a sale of a slave back in 1726. Obviously, when they passed away, I inherited that and a lot of other things. And over the years, I had a lot of stuff. And when I retired from the fire department, I sold off a lot in a estate auction. But I never felt right about selling this is sort of being a document due to slavery. I didn't want to participate in making money off of slavery. And I knew it had some intrinsic historical value, and I knew it was from the Cape because it was from Truro. And the name of the seller was Jonathan Payne, and it was sold to Jonathan Collins. Now, my family were cooks related to the cooks in Provincetown. Actually, my great-grandfather was buried in the cemetery up by the monument down there, David Porter Cook. He was the last one in town. Then after that, the family moved to Boston, Chelsea, and eventually into Braintree. And a long story short, I kept it for many years, but I never sold it. And when I moved away for a while, I put it in safekeeping in a safe at a friend's house, along with some other documents, which also relate to the 100th anniversary of the fire department. So over last summer, I was reading this book, which is called The Names of Cape Cod. And it's about names of different places on the Cape. And going through it, I saw a thing about Hector's Bridge. Now, the slave's name was Hector, who was sold at the age of 3. Well, apparently, young Hector made quite a name for himself in Truro back then. He lived on the same plot of land his whole life. He was buried there in an unmarked grave. He was baptized. And it says he was a lonely, devout man without family who recited his prayers aloud as he worked in the fields. Buried without a gravestone, he remembered something of a legend to local residents during the 19th century. There was also a Hector's Fence, and a Hector's Bridge, and a Hector's Meadow, all named after him in Truro. So those places still exist, apparently, which I found out. But anyhow, when I saw that, I never really made the connection between the document and who Hector was. I just thought it was a nameless person that was a slave, and that was the end of it. But he actually was quite a town, well-known figure in the town of Truro. So anyhow, once I retrieved that from where I had put it away, I contacted the Historical Society in Truro and told them what I had and asked them if they liked it as a donation to their collection. So they were quite excited, needless to say, and I brought it down with a friend of mine, Dan Doucette from the Bourne Planning Board, who helped me get this all together. And we gave the donation to them. Since then, they've done a preservation on the document. And then they invited me to come to this program next week to explain a little bit about what it is and how it came to be. So apparently back in 1726, this whole transaction took place. And, it was, like I said, the Jonathan Payne sold it to Collins, who was related to the Bangses from Provincetown and related to the Cooks. This is how it got to my family, some way around about through that way. Those other documents I sold, which I probably shouldn't have in hindsight, were like property deeds of pews in the church, and a few other miscellaneous items. But so that's the family connection. My middle name is Cook, which is the cooks from Provincetown on my mother's side of the family. So I'm quite excited that they're going to do this program. I don't have a lot of vast knowledge about slavery on Cape Cod, only what I've read, but the other speakers have that. So hopefully I can add something to this program and, make a little personal connection to it.
I saw the document when I was at the Truro Historical Society, and it is different to see it in person. It's worth checking out. It really does bring it to life when you see that.
And I don't imagine that there's many like this that are still in existence. Being its age, I mean, it's 50 years older than the Declaration of Independence and still in legible condition, which is amazing in itself. But
you have the 100th anniversary of the Bourne Fire Department coming up. Congratulations. That's a fun milestone.
Yeah, it is. And along with that document, I had put these others away years ago because we were afraid they would disappear and get lost. So I had these other documents that were given to me by Deputy Chief Small back in the 80s when we had a new chief come into town that was had a propensity to clean house, we'll put it that way, and things started disappearing. And he handed me these documents and said, these are very important. Make sure, I know you'll take care of them. So you take them and put them away. So I kind of forgot about them with everything else, but I had them locked up in a safe and everything with a friend, like with the other. And I was thinking just off the top of my head that the anniversary was like 27 or 28. And come to find out when I went back and reread everything, the process started in 24 and went into 25. So I met with Chief Cody back last fall, and I said, I think we ought to put something together for this anniversary. Of course, he was quite happy to have that information and move forward with it. Initially, we were going to look at a town committee, but because of the issues with open meeting law and everything else, the town administrator suggests, why don't you just have a committee within a group, and it's not associated directly with the town. It makes it a lot easier, which I was fine with anyhow. I didn't want to get involved in all that open meeting law stuff and everything. So we formed a committee, myself, retired Chief Marty Green, and retired Lieutenant Phil Truro. We're the primary leaders of this to get it started. So we've been doing a lot of research and putting together a few things. So we have a kind of an outline of a program. The anniversary is actually July 5th, 2025. But the process to start a fire department started in the fall of 2024 when they did a survey of the town by a private company to see what was needed for fire protection. At the time, there was really not much of anything. There was a private group in Buzzards Bay called the Buzzards Bay Protective Society that had a couple of horse-drawn vehicles, fire apparatus. And on the other side of the bridge in Monument Beach, they had put in a few hydrants. And that was it. And the only reason they put the hydrants in is because back in 1906, they had a big fire that burned a whole section of Monument Beach to the ground. And they asked for help and they didn't get a lot because there was no water supply here and they had no agreements like we have now with other towns. So that was the very beginnings of it. So there was a group of people mostly from Sagamore that actually were on this committee that's to investigate starting a fire department, primarily Harold Champion and Alonzo Sampson. They put together some town meeting articles for the spring town meeting of 1925 to establish a fire department under Chapter 48 of Mass General Laws. And that was passed at the town meeting and certified July 5th, 2025. They appointed a fire chief. Now, before that, they had a board of fire engineers. It wasn't a real fire department. There was a chief engineer who at the time was Ralph Johnson. And what they did was conscript people to fight fires. When there was a fire, they'd round up a bunch of people and get them over there to help put the fire out. And that was what was done before that. So when this was actually established, Ralph was made the first fire chief. He appointed a deputy chief and they hired a bunch of call firefighters. So that was the beginnings in 1925. In 1932, they adopted civil service Chapter 31, which allowed them to hire civil service firefighters. And they hired their first civil service fire chief, who was James Taylor, who was a retired battalion chief in the Boston Fire Department. And he served for 4 years getting things started here. And he hired one full-time person whose name was J. Thomas Wallace from Buzzards Bay. When Jim Taylor retired in 1932, it's called Tom Wallace, so J. Thomas Wallace. But anyway, he became the first civil service in-town chief. And just before that happened, there was a large fire in Buzzards Bay that burnt down 3 houses near Main Street. One of them was the fire station that was on Wallace Ave, right around the corner from where it is now on Main Street. And they were at the other 2 fires, and someone told them the fire station was burning down. They were like, okay, yeah, go away, kid, and come to find out it burned to the ground. So that's when they went to town meeting and had the fire station that still exists on Main Street in 1933 built. So over the years,
wait, before you go on, do they know the cause of that fire?
It was flying embers from the other 2 fires they were at.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's when you need more people at your organization.
So that kind of spurred them to increase the size of the force. And in 1930, actually just right around the same time, they hired some people that were called housemen for the other fire station. By that time, they had bought an old building in Monument Beach. There's another funny story about that. That was a stable used by the Gardner estate back in the 20s and turn of the century. And when they took the building over in 1932, they purchased it. In the town meeting, the article about it says that they hope to find a better facility in the near future. Well, today, they're still in that station with a trailer that the guys are living in because the station is unlivable. That's the whole story about trying to find a new fire station for the south side. So anyhow, they hired housemen for the Pecasset station. The original station was behind the one that's there now, which was another old barn that they bought, and another one in Sagamore, which is an old Plymouth Road, which is another horse barn. They hired housemen for each one. My grandfather was one of those, Tom Philbrick. He was hired in 1932, and he lived in the Monument Beach Fire Station. They stayed there for 2 weeks. Every other weekend, they get to go home for 2 days. It's the same thing in Pecasset and Sagamore. And they had one full-time man and a chief in Buzzards Bay. So that was the real origins of it. And there's a whole lot of stuff that happened afterwards, but I don't want to get into the weeds too far. But over the years, it grew. Chief Wallace was quite an innovator at his time. He went to school to be an instructor for firefighters, and he also took a first aid course and bought a respirator. Now, in the 1930s, that was cutting edge stuff. So they evolved pretty quickly. And in the late 30s, I'm still trying to get a copy of it, but there was a big article in the Bedford Times, the old Standard Times, about the Bourne Fire Department moving forward with great new ideas like two-way communication and fire towers and all of this other stuff. It was really quite amazing. So that was the early beginnings of the department, and what we're trying to do is to just, through old pictures and memorabilia and stuff, set up some static displays as part of the program. But anyhow, I should probably kind of give you a rundown of what we got planned. So this coming September, on the 14th of September, we're having a clam boil / cookout / program as a kickoff for this. The public's going to be invited. We're selling tickets for us. We also just today went live with a Facebook page for the 100th anniversary of the fire department. And so we're going to be selling tickets. We're also going to be selling T-shirts and hats and stuff. We're trying to get a lot of the retirees back for this to get them involved, plus some of the current members. But we're going to invite the public too, obviously. The week after that is Canal Day at the celebration at the park here in Buzzards Bay, which has turned into quite a big festival. So we've reserved a spot for that, and we're going to hopefully have a couple pieces of apparatus. I'm trying to get an old 1920s vintage truck and one of our new ones there for that. And we'll have a program, be selling T-shirts and hats. Over the winter, we're going to do a static program, which is going to be a display. We're going to move it around different places in town, probably the library, town hall, the fire stations, et cetera, in conjunction with like Fire Prevention Week and other stuff. And then next year, for the actual real anniversary, we're planning to be part of the 4th of July parade, but we're just going in conjunction with the town. And then a week or so later, we're going to have a big apparatus parade show, not so much a parade, but demonstrations and everything at the park in Buzzards Bay, inviting all the towns from southeastern Mass and whoever we can get, antique fire collectors, new apparatus, old apparatus, anybody that wants to come. And so that will be next year's program. The library is celebrating their 100th anniversary, not when the library was actually established, but the building they're in is turning 100 this year. It was actually the first grammar school in Bourne. It was the first school besides the old one-room schools. It was actually a combined with several grades in it. And then through their history, it became the library. So they're going to kind of work with us in some of this stuff, and we're going to be combining with them in some of our programs too.
That's awesome. So how many years did you serve?
Well, I'll just give a little bit of my history on the department. Like I said, it was staying. My grandfather was on. My father was a call lieutenant. And I got on the call fire department in 1971 when I turned 18. I was still in college at the time, but they let me go on. And I was on for 4 years. In 1975, they had reduced the firefighters' work hours from 56 hours to 42. So they had to hire another shift full of men in order to accomplish that. So there were 8 people hired that year, and I was one of the 8. So I was on the fire department full-time then from 75. And 85, I became lieutenant, 86, deputy chief. And in 1992, I took over as the fire chief, and I served in that position until 2000.
What was it like growing up, having your father and your grandfather be firemen, and then to be part of that legacy?
Well, it's a family thing. My Uncle Edgar was on too. He died before I was born. But anyhow, my grandfather, interestingly enough, was a logger from northern Maine. When he moved down here to work on an estate as an estate manager, then he got hired with the fire department. But he was born in 1881. He went on the fire department in 1932 when he was 51 years old. And he retired in 1963 at the age of 82. He never learned how to drive a vehicle. He only knew how to drive a team of horses. But he would stand up in the front, and they promoted him to deputy chief in 1944. And he would stand up in the front, the old cab with no roof on him, waving everybody on. And we used to take him to fires at night. So when I was 1 year old, they packed me up in the car and we were off to a fire because he couldn't drive. We had to bring him to every fire. So we took Grandpa around to every fire. So I started going to fires when I was 1 year old. And then I hung around the fire station growing up when he was on duty. And when I was like in first grade, it was really fun because I would go down there and they had to test the radios every day. So he let me turn the radios on in the truck so we could talk on them. And so I never really left it, over the years, other than going to school and working. My father ran a greenhouse business that I grew up right around the corner from there doing too. But so that fire station in Monument Beach was like our second home over the years. And back long time ago, that was the first place in the area that had a television. My father used to go. Everybody used to go down there to watch the TV when it first came out. And in fact, they had a color TV before we had one at home. So that was a big thing to go to the fire station to see color TV. So it was really the center of the community for years. My grandfather ran a Halloween party for the kids. He ran Christmas parties. He did all kinds of different venison dinners and all kinds of it. There was always something going on there. He made jelly for everybody, homemade baked beans. And it was just like a community center years ago. And you'll find that in other fires. This isn't unique to Bourne. It's the way fire departments are. I'm sure, like down in Provincetown, it's very similar because that was just a very close-knit group. And the same in the lot. A lot of the departments have gotten a lot bigger, including this one over the years, and it's not quite as personal as it was back then. It was a big family affair back then, but it's still a family no matter what, even today. So we're hoping we can have a good turnout for this thing this fall. And by the way, anybody interested in coming, you can go through the website, and we also there'll be a link there for email if you want to reserve tickets or come. We're also going to have a cookout like for hot dogs and hamburgers for people who don't want to pay the extra money for the clam boil and lobster, and because get a little pricey, but that's how it is these days. But we're going to have an alternative for people who want to come, especially kids who don't want to have to just to have a hamburger and hot dog and enjoy the program and stuff. So
very cool. So what's the website for that?
It's bfdcentennial@gmail.com. We have a Facebook page they just put up today. It's under Bourne Fire Centennial. I don't know exactly, but I'm sure if you look on Facebook, you'll be able to find it.
Just wondering if you have any other special sort of behind the scenes look into the life of a fire chief.
It's kind of, I guess probably the first thing is, be a fire chief is kind of a separate entity from being just on the fire department. Only because of the administrative duties, but you're still part of the same group. The nice thing about that position is that you get to, move things in the direction that you think this should be done. Get the equipment that you think you need, get the education for the guys you think you need. Steer and direct is kind of what it is. Except at a fire scene, when it's not steer and direct, it's you do this and you do that. There's two separate things. There's the fire chief politician, and then there's a fire chief commander, and they're totally separate in many, many ways. But at the bottom line, it's a group of people with some good leaders doing good work, and that's what it is. EMS is a huge part of the fire department now. It's 75% of our calls on every department on the Cape, and that all came about through the 70s and into the 80s with the paramedic program, etc. And then that's really the biggest focus. And later in the 80s and 90s, it became hazmat, which is still a big part of us. And fire prevention is really the main goal of the fire department. Fire prevention and hazard mitigation and saving lives medically or in fires or whatever. So it's all kind of molded into one thing. So the thing about the fire chief's job is that, like I said, you are the head of the fire department, but you're also intermediary between the town, the public, the fire department. And in our case, with our fire department, especially when I was there, we had call volunteers and full-time people. So you had a whole bridge you had to walk there too. You have a union, you have full volunteer calls, and you've got the town administration that you kind of have to walk a tightrope between to keep everything balanced. And it can be fun and it can be not so fun sometimes. It's stressful and fun, and some days you just wonder why. But it was a great experience, and I'm really lucky to have had the chance to do it. And now we've got some really good people. Chief Cody just retired. He was one of the people that I hired when I was chief. And the guy replacing him is David Palonzi, who was another one of the guys that I hired back in '94. And also Joe Carrera was just promoted to assistant chief. He was another one of my people that I hired. All super people that we hired back then. I didn't mention that back in 1991, the fire department in Bourne, as with the whole town, had a drastic budget cut because of Proposition 2.5 finally catching up back then. I don't know if you remember, this is almost ancient history now, but the town of Bourne had a $4.5 million deficit that year. They laid off 100 teachers and 30% of the fire department and police department. 3 months later, Hurricane Bob came. Our stations were unmanned except for Buzzards Bay. We only had one ambulance. The fire chief who was there when all that happened left because he didn't want to deal with what happened. He actually went to Maine. And so we were left hanging in the bag. And after I took over in '92, we had to start rebuilding again. Part of that rebuilding was to get more people back and also to get paramedics, which we were very short of. So back then, I was able through civil service to get the first firefighter paramedics in Massachusetts under civil service hired. One of them being Dave Cody, Dave Palazzi, and Phil Turer, and a couple other people who were our first full-time people who were designated specifically as firefighter paramedics. So that was quite a bump to get over when I first started. And then we gradually rebuilt. We got the Pecasset station, the Sagamore station reopened and manned, and we acquired a couple more ambulances, another engine. It's been a slow process, but today, since I left, things have gotten a lot better. The personnel is where it should have been years ago, and then some. They have a full-time fire inspector now. They have an administrative assistant chief. They have some really good staff and some amazing paramedics. And they've got 5 ambulances now, 4 in service all the time, and they're so busy. The call volume, when I left, our call volume per year was around 26 to 2,800 calls a year. Right now, they're well over 5,000. That's an average of 12 a day minimum. And
Wow.
those guys are going nonstop, all day and all night. You know, years ago, it was kind of nice working night shifts because you had to go out occasionally on a call, but most nights it was having dinner and a little nap. That doesn't happen much anymore. The guys are pretty busy, and but they do a really good job, and I'm proud to have done something to help get it going again. But the guys since then, Marty, Charlotte Kluber, Marty Green, we've got a whole list of the chiefs that have contributed that will be part of this program anyhow, to get it back to where it was and beyond to where we're at now.
So what can account for that growth in calls? Is it just that many more people?
Back when I first started, the population of the town of Bourne was barely 20,000. I think it was 18,000. It's in the 30s now, so that's part of it. And it's also the amount, the town of Bourne is, everyone passes through here to get to the rest of the Cape. And we have all the major highways that come together right here. So the number of motor vehicle accidents, dealing with the bridges, and a large elderly population that's getting bigger all the time, as you know, requires more services. And that's basically the bottom line is the people, the demographics, and the fact of where the town is located, that it has just grown and grown as call-wise. So we really have in a position where we've had to try to grow with that, and it kind of fell behind, but we've gotten back to where we're providing the service and also time responses is a big thing. The town of Bourne is very unique because it's cut in half by the canal. So anytime anything happens to those bridges, all bets are off and when we can get where. So we have to plan for that too. So that plays into what we need for personnel and everything too, given the call volume and the traffic increases that we have to deal with. So.
And my final question is, what's your most memorable rescue?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of dramatic calls and, things over the years, and some made big headlines because they were huge fires or huge tragedies or everything else. But, in my own mind, I said, well, we did the really good job there, but that's not something we want to gloat about is when, you save 2 people and 3 die, that's not the thing. But, you think about, and I think over the years, the small things are what stay with you. Like the first time you did CPR and someone came back to life, or the first time you defibrillated someone and they had the same result. I remember one time, one of the ones that really stuck in my mind for some reason, I don't know, it was a real cold night. We had a car flipped over in the woods down in Katomet, and I crawled in the car and I could see that the person was injured badly, but it was also a neck injury. And I grabbed their neck and I pulled traction on it until we got to the hospital and they got him into surgery. And he had a fractured C1 and 2 in his neck. And the doctor told me if you had ever let go of his neck, he would have died.
Thank you so much, Stephen. We've been speaking with Bourne Commission member and former Bourne Fire Chief, Stephen Philbrick. He'll be at the Truro Historical Society's Highland Museum at a talk with Meadow, Dibble, August 21st. If you're interested in learning about the history of slavery on Cape Cod, check it out. You've been listening to Healing Wisdom at Outermost Radio. All of our shows are podcasts at WOMR.org. Also check out healingwisdomradioshow.com and contact me at pandora@WOMR.org. Our theme music is provided by Mason. You can find her website at masonmusic.com. That's MAESYN.